evening, everyone. We'll kind of wait just to see if any more people come before we get into the real kind of the ins and outs of what we're going to talk about today. But I guess, really, if you're here, I think the chances are that you're potentially on a fertility journey. You may be going through assisted fertility. You're thinking about it. 1 in 7 couples are dealing with infertility right now. Many of those are going down the route. I think I read a stat, Matt, you'll probably know better than me, but I think it's like there's 2.5 million, cycles of IVF going on, at any one time. So many babies are being born through assisted fertility treatments now. And that technology is incredible. But what we want to talk about today is how we can, improve those chances, support our health, support our sperm health specifically, to just, I guess, improve those chances. But we'll be able to talk a little bit more about that when we speak to our experts. So I'm Connie, so I'm content manager at ExSeed. If you follow us on Instagram, you might have seen me and my long-suffering partner popping up and doing various videos and this, that, and the other, or doing some IG lives with some of the great guys that are on the panel today. But I'm really here just to facilitate this conversation. The men that we have are incredible experts and great at what they do. So guys, do you want to maybe introduce yourselves before we kind of really kick off?
Yeah, I'm happy to go first.
Go for it, Ciaran.
So my name's Ciaran. After a 10-year battle, my own fertility journey, I have 2 children now through ICSI. And what I found during my own journey was the fact of there was no real guidance in terms of exercise and lifestyle changes. We're going back 10, 12 years or so. And I kind of created my own kind of programs, and they were successful, and they increased my sperm levels and my general health, really. So now I spend my time putting together programs for other people through my own business, Humanity Health and Fitness, and that's specifically trying to improve sperm health for men. So that's me.
Amazing. And how about, so for anyone that doesn't know, Ciaran and Ian have just got back from trekking to the base camp of Everest to raise money and awareness for male fertility. So they are, we're the explorers and adventurers today, which is very exciting. So I'm very appreciative you both agreed to have this conversation so soon after getting back. So Ian, do you want to introduce yourself when you're not being an Everest explorer? What are you doing?
when I'm not traipsing up mountains, which is an incredibly unlikely and rare thing for me to do. My name's Ian Stones, Ho Fertility and Wellness. I am a fertility acupuncturist and male fertility coach. I also co-host the Infertility Support Group for Fertility Network UK. And for me, it's really about, helping men on that journey. So kind of there's some crossover with me and Ciaran, although I'm not a fitness freak. Not that I'm saying you're a fitness freak, Ciaran, but, I'm not a fitness guru, but I am a health and well-being kind of expert. So for me, it's about empowering men, educating them about their health choices, making sure they understand diet and lifestyle changes that they need to look at, but also guiding them and directing them on where to go for tests and further medical investigations and medical help, because actually I find that is something that a lot of men don't know or don't understand either, is what help is out there. So kind of very much there to kind of support guys throughout the journey, preconception and throughout, and helping them improve their health and fertility.
Amazing. Thanks, Ian. So from the ExSeed side of things, we've had a bit of a last minute change of lineup. We've got our CSO, Emil Andersen here. So Emil was originally meant to be on the panel. He wasn't available, but then he was. So Emil, thank you so much for joining us. Do you want to tell everyone a little bit about what you do at ExSeed?
Yeah. Thank you for the possibility. So I'm the scientific officer, as you mentioned, and also one of the co-founders of ExSeed, where we're working with diagnosing and treating male infertility. And I have a background in molecular biology, working with the epigenetics of sperm, and also how does the environment, so basically lifestyle such as diet and exercise, affect the sperm cell and the potential for it to fertilize an egg. And that's the quick background on me.
Awesome, thanks, Emil. And then Dr. Matt Pryor, thank you so much for joining us. I know you wear many different hats, but all in the fertility space. Do you want to just tell everyone a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, so I am based up in the northeast in Newcastle, where I'm head of department at Newcastle Fertility Centre, which is a large NHS unit that sees patients right from the beginning of their fertility journey right the way through to advanced kind of IVF and ICSI treatments. So I do that. I am also the medical director of Dr. Fertility, which is a startup company that does online consultations and provides support. But I think probably like most importantly is I'm actually really I think that men get a bad deal often with fertility. It's always very much focused around the woman. Even many of my colleagues and myself, our background is in like women's health, and then only a small handful of people like myself have done what's called subspecialty training, where we specifically look at men's health as well. And so I think that like men sometimes a bad deal because most of the treatments kind of are focused around the woman. And I think that also men are not always that great about talking about things. And so I think it would be it's really helpful to have a panel tonight where we can talk about it really with lots of guys who are sort of interested in this area. So I'm really looking forward to it. Thank you for inviting me.
Awesome. Thank you, Matt. And if anyone has any questions as we're going through, we will do a Q&A at the end, but feel free to share them in the chat box. If you want to stay anonymous, that's totally fine. But if you do want to kind of share a little bit about why you're here tonight, that would be also be lovely. Someone is saying they're having some audio problems. I can hear everything okay, but is anyone else having any issues? Just flag that with me and I can look into it. Okay, all good. Thanks, Georgia. Sorry, Kurt, maybe try joining, kind of going in and out of the audio. Drop me in. Okay, it all seems to be fine, so hopefully you can figure it out, Kurt. So Matt, actually, I think what you've just raised there is a really important point, and I think it really aligns with what we're trying to do at ExSeed, which is center men in the conversation around fertility and all that kind of thing. When you're seeing couples coming through to talk about things like IVF, to talk about assisted fertility, is it often that they're coming because there has been female factor infertility issues, and then maybe you discover that there could be issues of sperm health along the line? Or what's the kind of relationship that you see with that?
So it really varies. And like if you look at the overall kind of picture of like what causes fertility problems, we think maybe about 25% of it there's a male factor problem. But if you look at sort of 40% of couples who have fertility treatment, there may be an issue that affects the man and the woman. So it can often not be like a clear-cut thing. Look, is it a male problem? Is it a female problem? And I think really, whilst it's important to understand like the diagnosis and perhaps why there's a fertility issue, the reason why a couple have a fertility problem is it's kind of both of your problem. It doesn't matter like whether it's a sperm problem or an egg problem, and like, often like the blames can sometimes get put on one person, like, oh, it's my fault, which can often make it difficult to deal with. So I don't necessarily always look at it as, is it a male factor problem or a female problem? Overall, it's a fertility issue, and you need to kind of look at the couple as a whole. I think the other thing with male factor fertility is that no one can really kind of tell you exactly what it is. It's like a hotly debated area as to what is a male factor problem. We know that like the best test to kind of assess male factor fertility is a sperm test. But even kind of if you think about what we look for in sperm, like how many sperm are there and how well they're swimming, which we might talk a bit about later, it's probably a little bit more complicated than that, actually, eggs and sperm and how they interact and get to the right place, which I'm sure like lots of research has been done that we might sort of get into some of that later, but it's not really kind of a black and white thing about whether it's a male factor issue or not. There's many men who have low, perhaps or not quite normal sperm tests who have no problems getting pregnant, and then many men who perhaps do have a normal sperm test and there's other things in there that we don't quite understand. So it's not always quite as clear cut as is it a sperm issue or not.
Yeah, I kind of think that, and I know that Ciaran might be able to speak to this when we get on to talking about his story, but you might get people coming to you and not realizing there's a sperm issue, maybe finding out there is a sperm issue. But even if there isn't an obvious issue with sperm, do you see that improving sperm health will help improve potentially, you know, there's lots of factors that play here, but will it help improve the success? Because I think that maybe sometimes there's this idea that, well, IVF is, you know, it's we're taking the sperm, we're putting it in the lab, you know, jobs are good. But actually, I think there's a lot more to it than that, isn't it? And the sperm quality does really make a difference.
Yeah, so it can make a difference. And I think that when we talk about IVF, you have sort of two bits of IVF. There's IVF where you mix eggs and sperm together. And we only normally do that if there's kind of a normal sperm test. And then there's ICSI, which is actually what most people think IVF is, which stands for intracytoplasmic sperm injection, but everyone calls it ICSI. And that's the one that they show on the news when you see the egg with a needle going into it. And that's often done, or usually done when there's a male factor problem. But I mean, there's lots of research at the moment that's suggesting that perhaps male factor might have more impact on kind of pregnancy loss and miscarriage, embryo development. So anything that you can do to improve overall health and sperm health, for want of a better explanation, is going to be doing some sort of benefit. And there's sort of this concept in terms of assisted conception where there's some basic things you can do, but maybe it's like marginal gains. And actually by improving lots of small things, whether it be in the lab, whether it be with the sperm quality, all of those things together, if you perhaps get 1% better, if you add that all up, that becomes significant. So I think there's definitely a role to play to try and get things in as good a kind of shape as possible for when you have treatment.
Yeah, it's like you said, you know, it's trying to kind of maybe break down those gendered roles. I mean, we talk about this a lot in society, but even when it comes to fertility, it's actually as a couple, if you're coming together, it's a team effort. That's definitely something we talk a lot about at ExSeed, that it's like, let's not look at whose fault it is or who should be doing the improvements. And, you know, I think that from my work in the fertility space, you see a lot of time that it is maybe women driving those conversations, driving those improvements. And I think it's really important, which is why we're having this discussion today, is that actually, if you're both making effort and both, you know, doing those lifestyle changes, it's more fun to do it together and more supportive. But like you said, those incremental differences on both sides are all gonna like help, you know, eventually.
Yeah, and hopefully might be something we can talk a bit about later. But in terms of like what lifestyle differences can make, so they can probably make a bit of an improvement. But one thing I also see with couples is that perhaps if treatment has not been successful, and when you start off, it's a bit like a New Year's resolution, isn't it? On the 1st of January, like, oh, I'm going to follow this diet where I'm going to follow a diet, stop drinking, meditate every day, write in a journal, all these like things that you do. And then by like a week, you've not done it. And sometimes that can happen on a fertility journey as well, that right at the start, you make these commitments that you do something that's almost unachievable, and then you don't follow it, it doesn't work, and you go back and beat yourself up about it. And I'm quite sort of clear with my patients that while these things might make a difference, certainly trying to solve an entire fertility issue, if you have a severe male factor problem just through lifestyle changes, probably isn't going to work. It's about pulling everything together and about doing something that's realistic and achievable for you as a person and as a couple.
Yeah, and can you just talk a little bit about, you know, like you said, we've talked about IVF, talked about ICSI, you know, even kind of IUI, you know, things like that. What other, if someone is maybe listening to this tonight and they maybe know that they have got a male factor infertility issue, what are the kind of routes, like what are the steps to find out what the right treatment is for you?
So I think it can, unfortunately, it's still going to be sperm test related, and there's various different tests. There's obviously the ExSeed test, which hopefully people are familiar with, which I think can give you some useful information about what the quality is. And I mean, it's something you can do in comfort of your own home as well, rather than having to go and produce a sample in a hospital, or even do one at home and take it in. So that's always helpful to give a rough guide. Still, lab tests are probably or are still more accurate than a home test. And so anything that's not quite right, you'd always want to sort of verify by going to see a specialist and a lab. And then really it's then perhaps repeating it, because a sperm test, whatever you do, whether it's a home test or whether it's a lab test, is always just a snapshot of what things are like on that day. And loads of things can alter it, probably whether it be if you've been unwell the few weeks before. I know that if you get COVID, for example, that can knock results off for a little bit. So can any kind of illness. And so it's always worth repeating the test to see what it's like, and then seeing a male fertility specialist who can do things such as taking a comprehensive sort of history about your lifestyle and any other medical problems that might be affecting sperm health. If it's more severe, you may want to do some other tests to look, is there a cause? Is it to do with a genetic problem? Is it to do with hormones? Because the sperm are made by the testicles, and testicles have two jobs, making sperm and hormones. So checking male hormones is helpful. And also, even though a lot of men don't like it and don't always need to do it, but an examination just to check kind of testicular volume, so the size, and also to look for something called a varicocele, which is like a varicose vein, which can affect sperm quality as well. And that's something that you can have a treatment for to sort it out. So really you need to look at that, but then not in isolation. So it might depend on your female partner. So it doesn't matter how good your sperm is. If your partner has got blocked tubes or is gone through the menopause, then it doesn't matter quite how good your sperm is. You're not going to be able to sort that issue out. So you really need to look at it kind of as a couple rather than as an individual.
Yeah, look at it really holistically. Emil, so obviously we, as Matt said, we kind of work with Dr. Fertility, and we are that kind of first, with ExSeed test is that first kind of stepping stone, which can be helpful if guys are, right at the start of their journey and they're just trying to kind of get their head around things. In terms of the timeline, what do we advise in terms of doing the test and then giving yourselves room for making the improvements in terms of the science behind sperm production?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So first of all, I think it's an important point that Matt makes, that it's important to get more than one sperm test in order to sort of set the baseline for where are you actually. And after doing the first test, we recommend doing another test within a week, just to set the baseline of what is your sperm quality actually in from the beginning. And when you start doing lifestyle changes, we recommend that you track it over 3 months, but you should not expect anything to happen after 3 months. So most of the studies that do show an effect of lifestyle, where you actually see improvements in semen quality, you see them after at least 12 weeks of intervention. So that's what we recommend.
Amazing. So I guess, Ciaran, that's probably a really good time to talk about your experience, kind of everything we just talked about with Matt and Emil there. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey to becoming a dad?
It was when we started our fertility journey, we expected a bit of support because my wife has PCOS, so we kind of expected to be. We were kind of going down the route of Clomid. That's what we wanted. And everything kind of indicated that was the issue, the fact that my wife, Jennifer.
Can you explain what Clomid is? Sorry, Ciaran, for anyone that's not familiar with it.
It's just a drug, basically, that helps, would help my wife ovulate. Because she had trouble, she wasn't regular, didn't have regular periods, so it was a case of getting her medicated and kind of getting that ovulation a bit more regular, was what we were expecting. And we kind of went through the process, and then just right at the last moment, it was a case of, we just need to check your husband. So I went in and was like, that's fine, gave him a sample. and got called back a couple of weeks later. They started the conversation by saying to Jen that they can get her ovulating, but then it was quickly the discussion turned to me, and the doctor pretty much said, "But there's not much we can do for you, Ciaran." And that was, I've talked to you about this before, how much of a shock that was. It was the first I kind of had any inkling that anything was wrong, and it took a long time to process. We can go into a lot of detail about the emotions linked to it, but that's how I found out. So yeah, we've talked. It's been echoed here earlier. The fact of sometimes the treatment is significantly weighted towards the women. It's deemed a woman's problem when actually it's not. It's equally a man's issue, and I found that out quite drastically. So
yeah. Do you feel kind of, I mean, obviously it all worked out in the end, we can talk about how you got there, but I imagine at that moment you must have been like, oh my God, we've been having all of these conversations about my partner, we've been going through all this stuff, all this research, and if you had known sooner that there was also some issues on your side, then it kind of, I guess, you would have been a few more steps ahead. It must have felt like you got to a point and then kind of went 2 steps forward, 1 step back in your journey at that moment.
Yeah, I think the first thing I'd say is men aren't very open about how things affect them, and I think initially I was in complete denial. This doctor standing in front of me who's got a PhD and everything else must be wrong. The guy who stood me, I know me, and I'm not wrong. But yeah, you're right. It was once I'd processed it. And it's something that comes up in the support group, the infertility support group I've been out in, about actually education for men. And the fact of, if I'd known more beforehand about the process of how to get help, or what it might look like, or how it might have been affected, I would have been in a better position to deal with it, both emotionally and physically. What can I do to sort this out? So yeah, I think if I'd prior notice, not prior note, but yeah, prior knowledge, it would have definitely helped the situation. But it definitely felt like it was a last moment thing that I found out. And if you're looking at it really critically, a lot of money and time was wasted, when actually if I'd been tested right at the beginning, it would have been a lot more efficient. Yeah.
So when you kind of, like you said, you got that news, you went into a little bit of denial and head in the sand, I imagine, just trying to process all of this.
Yeah.
But then what did that look like at the time when you were like, right, I need to do something about this, and then we're going to have the assisted fertility treatment, and I want to kind of do everything I can to improve that. So what was that kind of journey and timeline like for you?
Well, the initial, because we had 4 cycles for my son. The first 2 cycles of ICSI, I kind of buried my head. I just kind of rode the roller coaster and was like, well, it will sort itself out. And then I realised as we started to, and it was money that kind of caused me to think, hang on, I'm running out of money here, and we've only got a few more attempts to go. So after a couple of years of kind of having my head in the sand, I decided to really look into, well, how can I affect and change things myself? Because you're told, oh, you need to lose a bit of weight, or you need to change your diet, you need to do this. This is how it was. It's different now because people are talking about it. But then there was no follow-up. It was just kind of like, oh, you need to lose a few pounds. The conversation, because I've always been into fitness and things, and there was steroid talk and stuff like that, and it was like, I've never done anything like that. But they were looking for a reason to blame why I was kind of had such a poor semen sample. So it took 2 years for me to get my head out of the sand, and then another, I'd say, 18 months of going through another 2 cycles and making life changes to see the significant significant difference needed to see that improvement in my sperm health.
And what was that improvement? Because I remember when we spoke before that the data was pretty impressive. I don't know if you can still remember off the top of your head.
Yeah, so when I had my first, like the first sample, well, obviously when I found out, the conversation was, well, how bad is it? And it was a really blunt. Well, we're struggling to find anything to count. They estimated that rather than having the millions, we're talking about thousands if I was lucky.
Mm-hmm.
And then once I kind of made the changes I need to, in this 18-month period, I went from still having thousands to then having like say 100,000 and then having a couple of million. I ended up getting up to about 4 million, which is a drastic improvement from where I was. It was no, it's not going to change like world science, but I managed to improve the health of my sperm, and that was clearly evident from those lifestyle changes. And as Matt said, it's one of those things that it's just an important part of the puzzle. And making those lifestyle changes definitely, I sit here and my son's upstairs asleep, and I know that's because I made those lifestyle changes, which was part of the puzzle, not all of it, just part of it. So yeah, it was about 18 months, and there was a good kind of level of improvement. And I've got the paperwork and things like that, and you can see it going up. So it proves that it works. You've just got to take your time with it and accept that it's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen like instantly. It takes time to make any bodily improvements. Our body doesn't just change overnight, which is another thing Matt mentioned about those realistic kind of those goals. So it's two cycles to see the real big changes.
Wow. Ciaran, I want to kind of talk to you and Ian a little bit about those lifestyle changes and other things we can do to improve sperm health. But just while we're talking about ICSI, I just want to jump back to Matt quickly, because I think what's really important that for the uninitiated, or even me, sort of sat here, it's like, okay, so ICSI is taking one sperm and putting it into an egg. So why does your sperm count matter? I imagine could be a question that might come up. Could you explain a little bit, Matt, about why it does matter and why sperm quality really does matter, even if you're having ICSI?
So yeah, we were just saying that it still gives, you've got a lot more to choose from, haven't you, if you've got better quality sperm. And like Ciaran was saying, that the first time round there were maybe a few thousand to choose from. Like when the scientist looks down a slide, and Emil's probably used to this, you might not have that many, and a lot of them might not be very motile, depending on just numbers. But when you've got like 4 million or so to choose from, you're far more likely to see some that are moving around, and that's really helpful.
Brilliant. So sorry, just to catch up. So you heard my ICSI question, why it matters, and you've answered. Brilliant. I mean, I really wanted to hear that answer, but I'll watch it back on the recording. Great. So Ciaran and Ian, maybe you can jump in here as well, because I know that Ciaran sort of almost like, has been through it himself and has really, seen, like I said, some incredible improvements from lifestyle. But I know that this is what you do, is you help guys with that. So could between you kind of just tell us a few of the factors? Maybe Ciaran, you can start with what really worked for you, and Ian, you can fill in the gaps with some other stuff that might be important to look at.
Yeah, that's grand. I mean, the biggest thing for me was becoming more appropriately active again, like making changes to my kind of my exercise regime and trying to lower some body fat. Because I played rugby growing up, and I had quite a significant injury, which meant that I had to stop playing rugby and put on a bit of weight. And I just started lifting really heavy weights and got bigger and bigger. So I had to kind of make changes to that, where kind of dropping my body weight percentage really was beneficial. On top of that, making changes like I stopped drinking alcohol altogether. I think that was more for other personal reasons as well, but it helped my mindset going through a very challenging journey. I cut out caffeine. And what else did I do? Oh, I started eating, my main thing was eating an organic diet. So really kind of, we talked about this before, the importance of my diet. And it went from being quite heavily meat-based to a more of like a vegan based or plant-based diet with occasionally real high or weekly high-quality red meats. And they were the things that I think made the most significant impact on my journey. And learning to de-stress is a big thing because it's a stressful journey and kind of whole experience. So finding time for you and your partner, just to kind of, you can't forget about it, but you can kind of just have a bit of time to yourself and try and forget as much as possible and get on with life as normal. So they're the things that kind of really help me. So I'd say exercise, alcohol, diet, caffeine, and trying to relax, which is very hard.
Ian, when men or couples come to you to who are maybe in a similar situation to Ciaran, or maybe are not quite at assisted fertility yet, but are seeing that things aren't going as quick as they might like to, what's your real starting point when you're working with guys that are seeing low sperm quality?
For me, it's always a really comprehensive history. So, my background in terms of kind of Chinese medicine and acupuncture is we will always take a huge kind of history. People are always surprised how much I end up covering with them. But I will look at, pretty much everything. So I'll look at their fertility history. So for a guy, I will go through his results with him and help him interpret those if he needs that kind of help. Understand, what's been going on. What were there any kind of childhood issues like mumps or undescended testicles? What's been the kind of fertility story so far? So actually, have they been through IVF, ICSI? What happened in terms of embryo development? Did they miscarry, etc.? So I'll get that comprehensive history, but then I'll look at things like sleep, digestion, bowels, dietary habits, work-life balance, stress management, exercise, and kind of bring all of that together with the fertility background, with understanding what tests they've had and not had, both the man and the woman. Typically, most of the guys have only had a standard semen analysis, haven't had any advanced testing. Like Matt mentioned, things like a simple physical examination, an ultrasound, maybe a DNA fragmentation test. And I will guide them on that, whilst also saying, okay, let's work on these elements of your diet, these elements of your lifestyle, these elements of your exercise. And I like what Ciaran said, in that I think you used the word appropriate. He changed his exercise to be kind of the appropriate type of exercise.
Yeah.
So often, I'll speak to guys that are doing, they're only going out for a run, or they're only doing weights down the gym, or they're only going out cycling. And it's okay, great, love that you enjoy your cycling, but can we balance that with something else? Can we bring in some yoga or some stretching or some walking or some swimming or something else? So I just try and get that balance across all elements really for them. And I think, as Matt said very early on, it can seem quite daunting, kind of trying to suss out what you've got to do, and that, it doesn't become a New Year's resolution thing of, oh crap, I've got to do everything. I always remember that NHS advert of somebody on a treadmill trying to quit smoking, throwing the beer away, and trying to, measuring their waist and worrying about all these things. Actually, if you work with somebody over a period of time and you make small, manageable, incremental changes, then you can create some really good habits. You can create some long-term changes. And it's sticking with the plan like that, like Ciaran said, 18 months. That's quite a long period of time to have to work at this, but actually just over 3-4 months, create some good habits and good changes, and it can make a massive difference.
Yeah, I'll agree with you there, Ian. It's the time, understanding that it takes time, and like when I started to implement things in my life, I kind of took things like a month at a time. So the first thing was like to figure out an exercise regime for myself. And once I got comfortable with that, I then looked at my diet. That was the next thing I looked at. And then I looked, after a month of getting the exercise and the diet ready together, it was right, what can I do next month? And that's when I, stopped the alcohol. And it was like each month I just added something. So I didn't feel completely overwhelmed, because it is overwhelming. But you take small steps, and over time, my time it was a long time. It was 18 months, but it, over that 18 months, small changes added up to big change. So that's what, people can't become overwhelmed of all the changes. Take it a bit at a time. Take it until you're comfortable with one, and then move on. When you're comfortable and you feel like you're ready to take on another additional change. So yeah.
I think I just wanted to pick on something you both sort of touched on there, which is stress, but also kind of emotional well-being in general. Because I think that on one side, maybe Emil and Matt can even talk a little bit more about the science about it. Like, I think it can be quite damaging to say stress causes infertility, because if you're dealing with infertility, you're going to be stressed, and then you can get into this vicious cycle where you're feeling guilty for being stressed and stressed about being stressed, and all of that sort of thing. So I think we know that stress can have a negative impact on the body, and that can definitely have a knock-on effect on our reproductive bits and bobs, whatever they may be. But I think what you touched on, Ciaran, that emotional well-being part, because I think that's something that when we planned this session, we really wanted to talk about, because I think as a couple, if you are a couple going through this process, if you're both struggling and one of you's making loads of effort and one of you's not, like, that can be really hard, like that kind of imbalance, and that can put a strain on your relationship as well. And if you're getting stressed and your mind and mental well-being is struggling. So I guess I don't really know what my question is. I guess it's more of a message of, if you're doing these improvements for your sperm health, it's also going to have a knock-on effect in all areas of your life positively, which will then make going through the challenges of infertility that little bit easier. Would you guys agree with that a little bit?
Yeah, I would. Experiencing it, I was really lucky in terms of my wife was super supportive, and she gave me the support that I needed when I needed it, and vice versa, because it takes two to do the process. But managing stress and emotional well-being is becoming increasingly important in life, I think. We live in such a fast world that kind of expects instant results, and it can't happen like when you're talking about making changes to your lifestyle and specifically like your fertility. So taking that time, it comes down to time again. Just acknowledging that it's going to take that time, and that as long as you give it that time and step back as a couple, I think is important to reflect with each other and be open and honest. When I was having a bad day, I spoke to my wife, and she knew when I was having a bad day, because I came all grumpy and I'd walk around, storm around like I was a toddler again. But it kind of, addressing the small things will make the stress seem less stressful. And it's one of the things, I was talking to a guy the other day, because he was saying, I really enjoy cycling. Cycling's really bad for me and my fertility. And the conversation I had with him was, well, if I take that out of your program, I said that the stress that's going to cause you is probably just as damaging as doing too much cycling. So you've got to have that balance. And Ian mentioned it about the balance to make everything come together. People just need to be aware, and time. That's the biggest thing I'm going to say. Give it time and accept the time. Ian?
And I think take time for yourself as well, isn't it? It's kind of, you gotta talk as a couple. The guy's got to open up about what he's going through and challenges, and that makes a huge difference. I think, as you mentioned, Connie, kind of, the women tend to do the research. They've come up with the meal plan or the kind of supplement plan, and the guy kind of is dragged along, sometimes kicking and screaming or kind of reluctantly, and kind of got his head in the sand, as Ciaran kind of mentioned. But actually, if as a couple you work on this together as a team and you open up, and the guy can be honest about how he's feeling and how it's affecting him, because one thing stress definitely affects is sexual performance. When you're just expected to perform because it's ovulation time, that's a surefire way to turn a guy off. So I think if a couple can have that open relationship and conversation, that's really, really important, and that will help a guy massively. But he also needs to find an outlet for himself, and that is often when they jump on a bike, unfortunately, or go out for too many runs or whatever it is. But is it a sport? Is it actually finding that one mate that you can talk to where you can open up? Is it going for a long walk? Is it reading a book? Whatever it is, you've got to find something to decompress, and take some of that stress and pressure of the whole situation out of it. And a lot of guys do tend to exercise as a great way of coping, and I think that's really important.
And I guess as well, I think the support groups that have really sprung up in the last sort of 12 months, which obviously I know you've got to go in 15 minutes to go and host one, but I think that's also really worth flagging, is that if there's any guys in here that are struggling, like you said, you and your partner are in this together, you're a team, you're each other's rocks in this, but sometimes it's really helpful to talk to other men that are going through the same thing, who understand the emotional stress of it, but also you can maybe share tips and share advice on what worked and what didn't, and get your heads around the fertility space. I think it's great that we do now have these spaces that are really safe spaces for men just to connect with each other, and I'm sure you see that all the time, Ian, as people through this journey.
Yeah, the infertility support group, it's a really magical place, and it's one of the highlights of my month, really, hosting that, because now what we see, we've been actually running it for 2 years, is we see full kind of peer-to-peer support. Initially, when we started it, me and Toby would talk a lot, and we would give a lot of information, and we get kind of speakers in to share their expertise. Now we kind of open it up. We might chat for 10, 15, 20 minutes, and then we hand it over to the guys, and they just support each other. And that's really amazing to see. A guy will come in, he may never have joined the group before. He shares his story. We've had guys literally turn up on the day that they've been told they're aspermic, that they've got no sperm in their ejaculate. They share it in a bunch of group, with a bunch of guys they've never met before online. And they just feel this huge weight lifted off their shoulder. The problem hasn't gone away, but they're like, oh, okay, it's just knowing you're not alone and that you're not the only one going through this. And then, the guys chip in and say, oh, I went and see so-and-so, and I did this, and I did that. That's so valuable. It's really a fantastic space.
Amazing. And I want to kind of ask Emil in a minute just a bit more about the environmental impact on sperm, because I know that's something that you've done a lot of research into. But one thing that just sprung to mind when you guys were talking about sexual performance is also, I think it's really important to make sure you're keeping that love and romance alive in your relationship if you are going through assisted fertility, because it might be, I don't know, it might be that it's kind of like, okay, well, we don't have to have sex every month when you're ovulating, and then that kind of maybe goes off the cards a little bit, or maybe you're kind of, oh, I don't want to ejaculate because I want the sperm to be a really good thing. But I guess it's really important just to keep that, the romance alive in your relationship, and keep loving each other, and keep making time for each other, even if it feels like the baby making side's got a little bit clinical, because your relationship is still really important. I don't know if Ciaran, you have any thoughts on that. Don't want to ask you about your sex life necessarily. Really put you on the spot there.
No, I agree, because you can quickly, I think in the first 2 cycles, like when I had my head buried, we kind of grew apart. But then when you kind of, start talking and opening up, it quickly came back, and we became like a couple again. I know that sounds weird, but you don't purposely drift apart, but you do because of stress. So I totally agree. It's important to keep intimate with each other, and to have those conversations, because if you don't, it will crumble at the end of the day, because men have needs, women have needs, and it's important that as a couple you talk about it. And I think as you go through, it's a really, once again, I was talking to someone else about this the other day. As you go through the treatment, that will change. So you might not become as intimate you know, in terms of sex at certain points during the cycle, because there is that worry of what if we had sex and it caused a miscarriage? What if, we spent all this money and it happens naturally, and you know, all these things, even though for us it wasn't going to happen actually, but you have all these worries. But to talk about it is key. To talk about it, and there are other things you can do than to, you know, just always have sex. It's a case of just spending time together, going out and having dinner, just you two together. But communication is key for that. You have to talk.
Yeah, maintaining the intimacy doesn't have to be about sex necessarily, but it's just keeping it alive. I think that's really important.
Yeah, 100%.
Great. Yeah, Emil, like I said, I know that you know, we've talked about the kind of factors like exercise, stress, you know, sleep, that sort of thing. But I know that you've done quite a lot of research into the environment and how that can impact sperm health. And I think there's more and more research in this space coming out. So could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think we are seeing more and more research coming out. I think one of the things that I think is important is that we have people like Ian and Ciaran also like supporting men already now early in the process, even though we may not have all like everything set from the medical standpoint on how to actually treat male fertility. I think it's male fertility, infertility. I think it's important to just act on these things anyway, because there is a lot of things that we know will impact your health in general in a positive way, and I think those are often the first steps to take. But obviously from the literature, we do know that I think the diet is one of the most important things, and that's also where we've seen the biggest impact when we're looking at male infertility isolated. So basically, from the scientific standpoint, we want to look at these things in an isolated manner. So only looking at how does diet affect fertility, how does exercise affect infertility, because otherwise it's too complicated to actually understand what is it actually having an effect. But I think as Ciaran and Ian already mentioned, I think diet is one of the most important things, and just from some of the better studies, we know that increasing your amount of vegetables, fish, chicken, fruits, nuts, drinking more water, minimizing the amount of caffeine you take, minimizing sugar and soy, it has a positive impact on semen quality, and then obviously, and another one of the big ones is exercise, and most of my studies has been focused on obesity as well. So we know that having a too high BMI is also negatively impacting male infertility. Yeah, so I think that would be the sort of the overall roundup of how the environment would affect infertility. And I think from my standpoint as well, now we just discussed stress, and I think stress is obviously important from a lot of standpoints, both the emotional health that you discussed, and from the standpoint of looking at it scientifically, it's a difficult one, because you need quite a lot of stress before it actually impacts your health. But we do see with increased stress that you see a lower testosterone level, and there are a few studies also suggesting an impact on the sperm production. But I think it's important that you as a male just sort of monitor your stress and how you feel throughout the process, because it is a difficult process. But I think life in general, you will have ups and downs throughout your life. So I think it's also just important to notice that everything is also not related to the fertility issue. It may also just be life that is pushing you in different ways. Yeah.
Matt, I kind of, I think Emil talked from like a sort of research and science perspective about sperm production and how long it can take for sperm to improve and that sort of thing. But I wondered if you could give us like a sort of like practical idea of like when someone is coming to you and maybe, say for example, they've come to you and maybe they've done the ExSeed test and said, okay, these don't look quite as good, or maybe, you're looking at different factors. I guess what I'm trying to ask is, the timing is so important in assisted fertility, right? Because, especially if we're in IVF and, the female is having all these hormones to ovulate at a certain time. So the time isn't really like critical, isn't it? So what would be your advice in terms of, just, I guess, that real timeline to make sure that your sperm is in the best condition it can be for the right time when you kind of need to give that sample?
So I think it's a really tricky one, and Ciaran told a really powerful story earlier about how he'd made all these changes in his life, and then it'd gone on and been really successful. And in some ways, you can't kind of argue against a really powerful story like that. But I do think that we need to be a little bit careful that even though there's lots of evidence that some lifestyle changes can improve sperm quality, there's still very few at the moment that show that actually making big changes is more likely to give you a baby. And that's partly because the situation is really complex, because it's not just about the sperm parameters, it's about all the other things as well. So while I think one of the things that's really powerful about Ciaran's story as well, and Ian, is the support that it's given him, and the fact that changing his diet, that getting that exercise regime right, the wellness kind of aspects really helped support him and Jennifer through the whole process. And like you said, your head was buried in sand kind of the first 2 cycles, so making those things work really well. And I think that's probably, in my mind, a really important thing, because going through fertility treatment is very stressful. It's difficult. It's probably one of the most stressful things that you can go through. And getting that kind of, it's almost that performance thing to say, look, you've got to have it perfect on this day because this is where it's going to be. You're almost setting yourself up to fail, because it's quite difficult to kind of do that. And you don't know, because there's even some variation on the day between which embryologist looks down, and if maybe it's a million short of what it was previously, that you shouldn't beat yourself up about it. If it doesn't work, it's not that's likely to have been the issue. So I think it's about being realistic and doing things that are right for you kind of as a couple, and not to necessarily think that if it's not been successful, it's been entirely because of a lifestyle thing. But I think the key thing, and this is where it really helps to have kind of coaching and support, which you might not get kind of through a standard sort of clinic, because while we take a comprehensive history, being able to have that support to create kind of specific targets that are smart targets, aren't they? Specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and in the right time frame. And this is the things that probably Ian's bread and butter kind of work for working with people, and having that coach and extra support can be really helpful. And not trying to make all those changes in one go, and doing what's right for you. So I don't know if that gave the right answer or was helpful, but I don't have a set program that if someone goes, oh, we're having treatment in 3 months' time, this is what you should follow, because it's going to vary so much for each individual person. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't necessarily mean, in fact, probably not to do with the lifestyle factors, and don't often you can then go back and blame yourself that you've done something wrong when you haven't. Unfortunately, despite all the advanced science, fertility treatments are still not all that successful. They fail more times than they work.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really important, I think that's the balance that we need here, is that there are people like Ciaran who have got amazing stories that can inspire and give people, the hope, and that there are some success stories. But I think you're right, we need to kind of balance that with the realist thing. And actually, I wanted to kind of come back and ask you a bit more about if things aren't improving from lifestyle, and the kind of assisted fertility route that guys might go down then. But I know that Ian has to jump off to host the Him Fertility Support Group. So Ian, I don't know if you've got any closing comments or any pearls of wisdom you want to drop before you've got to rush off.
Yeah, I'm sorry to have to drop off. Toby was going to be starting the group off. I've literally just got a message saying he's not very well and he's going to bed. So if I don't turn up, the group doesn't happen. So sorry about that. But I think what you were saying there, Matt, was important. For me, I do feel the lifestyle and diet stuff's really important, and if you can, and I think Emil said this as well, we know that diet and exercise and body mass are really important to focus on. And I think if we can get guys thinking about that stuff ahead, a good 3 months ahead of going for any kind of fertility treatment, then what you're doing is you're just trying to stack those odds in your favor. You wouldn't go into a marathon without a little bit of prepping. You wouldn't trek to Everest Base Camp without a little bit of prepping. I didn't do as much as I should, but I did some.
I know you were struggling with the prepping.
Yeah. Well, Ciaran wrote me an exercise program, but I couldn't even do that because I wasn't feeling very well. But, you know, you want to go into this with knowing that you've done the best, best that you can, rather than going in kind of slightly overweight and still eating saturated fats and kind of processed foods. Why go into such a emotional kind of process, a potentially hugely expensive process, and not give yourself the best chance? So a kind of simple kind of dietary lifestyle review and workup, and some very simple manageable steps that you can do in little steps is a great thing to do. I can't even remember what the question was, to be honest. But I always do this on webinars. I go off on a tangent, but for me, that's really important that guys take that time. And like say, Matt, kind of, in the NHS, kind of if you're going down that road, that there isn't that type of support. And I think a lot of guys struggle with knowing what to do. Or one of the things I see a lot with people I work with, they know what to do, they don't know how to do.
Yeah.
Because it all seems too big and too where do I start? It's a bit like when you turn up at your desk and it's an absolute mess, and it's like, God, where do I start? And it's like, okay, just start somewhere and start small, and then you can build on that. So yeah, I think that will be my closing comment, and my sincere apologies for having to dash off early.
No worries, Ian. Thank you so much. And we'll be sending an email out with the link to the recording and Ian's details. So if you do want to work with Ian online or in person, then we'll make sure you get all his details. Thanks so much, Ian.
Cool. Thanks all. See ya.
Bye. I want to open up the Q&A. We've had a really kind of detailed question from one of our attendees. But before we do that, I just want to talk to Emil a little bit about our test and kind of testing in general. And then I think we'll open this Q&A up and see where that takes us, because I think we've got some more interesting topics to cover. Emil, Ian mentioned there, being proactive, which I know is, sort of the real foundation block of the work that we do at ExSeed. I know that maybe we can talk about how the sperm test feeds into assisted fertility treatment, and how, for example, how we work with people like Matt to kind of be that starting block. Could you explain a little bit about the test and how it could help?
Yeah, I think that is quite important. And I think also I want to echo what Matt was also saying. I think although we do see research suggesting that lifestyle improves sperm quality, which may also translate into positive fertility aspects, science is also not suggesting that this is sort of a magic cure to infertility. So I think that is important, that it's probably also other factors that are sort of in play, and not only lifestyle as an isolated thing. But yeah, to introduce the sperm test to those of you who haven't heard about it before, our test is basically that you get sent a small device that looks like this. Basically what you are instructed to do is to download an app, and with that app you're guided on how to deliver the sample in a cup, transfer the sample to a sample slide, and then afterwards inserting the sample slide into the device. And with the smartphone and the app, you're then recording a video of your semen sample that you're uploading to the cloud, and we're then analyzing this semen sample with algorithms that you actually also have available in the clinic. So the semen analysis that you get from us is basically similar to what you would get in the clinic. You get how much semen did you produce, the semen volume, you get how many sperm cells do you have, the sperm concentration, how many of them are moving, the motility, and what we then calculate is then the total motile sperm count. And what we want to do with this number is we want the males to try and translate this into something that makes sense from a fertility perspective. So if you are in the low range, you would have a lower chance of conceiving per cycle if we look at the studies that are looking at this. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to group men into what are their chances of conceiving with a given semen quality, and how likely are you then to improve on that semen quality if you start on lifestyle changes. So obviously, if you have a lower semen quality, it's more important to get started on those lifestyle changes early. Also, we do suggest men that are having a lower semen quality to go out for fertility evaluation early on. So I think one of the most important things that we do is that we spot men who are azoospermic, so not producing sperm cells at all. And I think those are some of the most important, that you're not spending or wasting time on trying to conceive without having really any chance of conceiving. There are medical sort of treatments that you can actually do to restore sperm production for some men. So I think it's important that we get some of those men into the arms of the doctors. And also, if you're having a lower semen quality, we also want them to actually go for the fertility evaluation to see, is there anything we can do? So we don't want men and couples to wait for too long before seeking treatment, because this is also what Matt could probably talk about as well, is that the older you get, the lower the chance of conceiving with artificial reproductive techniques. So we want this to be as effective as possible. Yeah, and I think, and I think the one thing that we do on top is something that you also just quickly mentioned, Connie, is that we also do have our lifestyle program. So for men, we want them to take action as easy as possible. So basically, you fill out the questionnaire in the app as well. And we then, based on those questionnaires, rank what are the lifestyle changes that are most likely to have an effect on you. We don't want men to just get this, like, change everything at once. We want to rank it, and the men can then look at what would the chances of sort of living up to these suggestions be.
Yeah, I think you mentioned time there, and I think time and money have actually come up quite a lot in this conversation, which I think is definitely relevant to assisted fertility. I mean, I'm sure we might have people on this call who aren't from the UK, but speaking from the UK perspective, you know, you can get, in some areas, you can get a certain amount of assisted fertility treatment funded by the NHS, but doctors do want you to be, you know, waiting a certain amount of time. You have to kind of go through that. And that can, you know, depending on when you're starting a family, you know, 12 months of waiting plus maybe trying some stuff without even maybe realizing that sperm health could be, as Matt said at the start, you know, a factor, not necessarily the whole reason. But I think that's, like you kind of said, Ciaran, that kind of feeling of wasting time, maybe wasting money, that's really disheartening. So I think being proactive about understanding your sperm health and trying to improve it a little bit can, yeah, just help you maybe reduce the risk of, like you said, trying to conceive for a year without having any idea that you have no sperm. You know, having no sperm and being azoospermic is, you know, really difficult to deal with, and you know, that's you kind of maybe go on a whole other journey that you didn't expect. If you've wasted 12 months of your time cycle tracking, looking at ovulation, that can be really heartbreaking, I think, at that time. So I think being proactive is always going to be a good thing, because knowledge is power when it comes to your fertility. So even if you get the news that you didn't want, you know what's happening there, and then you can make choices based on that information rather than kind of burying your head in the sand, going in blind. Does anyone else have anything to add before I kind of go into a few of the Q&A that we've had from the audience?
No, I kind of echo what everyone else is saying. It's about being realistic about things. You know, I was very lucky in my story, but that isn't realistic for everyone. So to have that acknowledgement as you're going through the cycle and journey. I mean, we even had a discussion as a couple, like what we're going to do if it doesn't work, and that was a really difficult but important discussion. So yeah, that's what I've got to say really on that. I think it's an important thing to acknowledge. Yeah,
and I guess at the end of the day, there's never any downsides to improving your health. So even if, you know, it would, you know, the ideal is, like Ciaran, you know, you see that there's a problem, you want to improve it, you make loads of last attempts and you get to see that, that's incredible. Even if you didn't, your mental health's going to be in a better state, your general health, you know, when you're becoming a parent, you want to be healthier, you know, so quitting smoking and, you know, getting more active, it's always going to benefit you, even if it doesn't have a direct or dramatic impact on your sperm health. So I think there's no downsides.
Yeah, 100%. I agree there. I think knowing why you're making those lifestyle changes is really important, because for some people, if you're not producing any sperm, but you're going through a fertility cycle, say through donor eggs, having a structured and well organised exercise plan will be good for your mental health. Which is just as important, and you can have those conversations with people who understand what you're going through. But that comes back to the making sure that these guys are getting tested early, so we know exactly why we're doing things, rather than just waiting till it's too late or guessing. Assumptions are like the worst thing to do.
Awesome. Right, I'll read out a few of these questions. Maybe Matt, you might be best placed to answer these, but guys, feel free to drop in. So I'll keep them anonymous just in case people do want to be anonymous. So someone said, we're almost 4 years in, 8 ICSI treatments without any luck. 2 of the tries with no good eggs at all, and only 1 try with 3 good eggs at once, I think that says. All other tries have had 1 good egg we could use. If you can follow that, it's a little bit confusing, but these couple have been trying a lot. And I'm looking at egg and sperm quality. So the guy here said that they are the problem. Try not to see yourself as a problem, but with very low sperm count, 400,000. I don't smoke. I exercise 3 times a week with weights, drink a maximum of 2 beers a week and 2 cups of coffee per day. I live a normal, healthy lifestyle and can't pinpoint what changes I can make. I've tried cutting down on meat as well and increasing vegetables. My body weight is 85 kilograms and I'm 185 centimeters tall with relatively low body fat. It must be due to DNA damage of the sperm, and that's the question. My wife has been tested in a wide series of tests and everything looks fine. Are there any sperm DNA tests we can recommend or good suggestions for moving forward at this point?
So I probably need to just be a bit careful in that I can't give any like specific individual advice in a webinar forum, just because that's kind of what our regulator says. But first of all, like that's sort of a heartbreaking story, really, and you hear that all so often of couples that have gone. I mean, 8 cycles is like a lot for anyone to go through. It's like fertility treatment, and presume that will have taken a long time, and the whole build up to that. So this journey's been going on for a really long time for both of you, and it sounds like you're doing everything right. I think that's one of the key things is like, look, you've ticked all the boxes. I don't know what your weight is, but like you're doing all these things right, and that's in a way can make it difficult, because it almost beats you up even more, because you see couples who get pregnant who like don't have any kind of, have the worst lifestyles, the smokers, the drinkers, and it can feel really cruel. So I think my advice from there is, look, actually you are doing all the right things. Do things that help you to manage stress and control stress. And if you find that exercising and things like that are working for you, then obviously continue to do those things. But it's probably based on that story a bit more complicated than just sperm. It sounds like the egg numbers are quite low from treatment. As both men and women get older, the chances of fertility treatment success goes down. So for women who are sort of between 40 and 42, we only normally sort of think there's about 1 in 10 of those will have a baby with a cycle of treatment. And then as women get older, kind of 44 or over, using your own eggs, there's only about a 1% chance of having a baby with a cycle of IVF treatment. So I think it's important to put it into perspective as to what it is. It doesn't necessarily mean that everything's all about kind of the sperm. And then that kind of brings to like DNA fragmentation. And this is a bit of a very controversial topic at the moment in reproductive medicine. And there's a lot of people who are like, well, actually, these are better tests to look at. Is there any damage to the sperm? But then a lot of scientists, and I'd be interested to hear what Emil's view is on this, but I know lots of andrologists who go, well, actually the tests are not that reliable. And if you do one on one of the companies, you might get different results to one of the other companies, and so you can get different sort of test results. And there's still not yet things that are proven that actually can reverse that DNA fragmentation to be able to improve your chances of having a baby, either naturally or with assisted conception. So sometimes you're in sort of, in some ways, a vulnerable situation that might be, oh, let's just get more tests done, but that may not be the right answer. And talking this through either with your clinician or fertility counsellor can be really, really helpful.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Matt. I think also just when we look at these more expensive tests, I think it's also important to think about what is it that you want to get out of performing this test, because as I see it as well, as you also touched upon, Matt, you're already doing a lot of the, like, well, it seems that you're doing everything right in terms of lifestyle. So most likely isolating it down to lifestyle being the issue here is, I think, is probably not the right way at looking at it, because you are doing everything right on lifestyle. And basically when we are looking at these DNA tests, I think the purpose of them, at least in the clinic, is if they can give us a better prediction of whether you need to use IVF or if you need to go for ICSI. So I think looking at it from a lifestyle standpoint, where you already are in treatment and using ICSI, I would not necessarily see any benefit of actually performing the test, because you're already doing what I think you're supposed to. I think you're on mute, Connie. Did you have any comments on that, Matt?
No, I agree with you that you're right. They're expensive tests, and unless they're going to change what you're doing, is it really worthwhile doing the test? Because it's quite common to see levels of DNA fragmentation, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's the issue. And certainly you've done everything right. I think it's a lot more complicated in your circumstances.
Yeah, when I was on mute, I was just saying that I don't know if that was helpful, but I hope that it makes you see that all the guys here think you're doing all the right things that you could be doing and doing the best for your fertility and your sperm health. So just wishing you the best of luck, because it sounds like you've been on a really tough journey. So I'm wishing you luck for your next cycle if you're going down that road.
Yeah, maybe also, I think just as an add-on, maybe Ciaran, you can also maybe comment on your journey, because you said you were also coming from a low sperm count and then sort of going up, but I think you still ended up using artificial reproductive techniques, right?
Yeah.
In your case.
Yeah, we did. Yeah.
Yeah.
We still needed ICSI to be successful. I think we were kind of put on that road quite early. So for me, it was a case of what can I do just to improve or try to improve just the quality of the sperm. I knew there wasn't going to be a miracle, but it was going to be, can we improve that quality? But like you guys have said, it sounds like they're doing all the right things. Possibly introducing a bit of cardiovascular, like a bit of running into their program or something like that, I would suggest, because if they're just doing weights, just kind of changing it up a bit. If it hasn't been working, changing that approach maybe slightly, but it sounds like they're doing all the right things. So it's a tricky answer.
You talked a little bit, Ciaran, about the conversations that you had with your partner if things weren't working, and I think like from a personal perspective, and maybe Matt from a clinic perspective, at what point do you sort of say to couples, okay, we maybe need to look at a different route here, or we may start considering donor sperm or donor eggs, or whatever that different step might be. How do those conversations come up for you, Ciaran, between you and your partner?
It came up, it was a very emotional conversation because, I mean, you've mentioned it, the fact of you can't kind of see yourself as the issue, but you can't help it. You can't help it. I think it's human nature to kind of to blame yourself sometimes. And it was the conversation of, well, if this doesn't work, I need to be a dad. I don't know how this is going to happen, but I need to be a dad. And we just sat and it was probably over like 2 or 3 weeks, we kept having the same conversation. It just kept coming up in car journeys or while we were eating dinner. Initially, it was a very raw one, and then gradually, kind of, we came up with almost like a backup plan. I know it sounds horrific, but it was like, right, if this doesn't work, what's plan B, C, and D? And it was a case of my wife. She has a sister who's adopted, and we've even talked about adoption now, even though we've got children, in terms of just giving someone that chance. Or I found it very difficult in terms of a conversation about donor sperm. I think now, reflecting back, as a bit older, a bit more mature, maybe I would be more open to the conversation now. I wasn't at the age of like 26, 27. But it's important to have the conversation. The first thing is just to talk. What is the plan if this doesn't work? Or what could it look like? Because things change. You can't kind of cement it down. But that's a personal one. That's how it happened for us.
And it is all really personal. I mean, I'm just wondering about how that works in a clinic. I mean, not using this question as necessarily an example to jump, but I feel like sometimes people go through so many cycles, and they're just like desperate for answers and desperate for like, what's this next step? It's like, do we do a DNA fragmentation test? That's our net. It's like, it just gives people a bit of control maybe, or feel like they're moving forward. I know you can't give personal advice, but when you're in the clinic, people are getting those situations.
I think that it's a one thing that doctors hate saying, and should probably say a lot more often, is I don't know. And like fertility treatment often raises a lot more questions than it does answers, and sometimes trying to look for those answers, or the more you look for it, the more questions it raises, and you get to this point where you're in a vicious cycle, and it becomes unhelpful, and you become fixated on a particular thing. And so I think sometimes it's about being comfortable about what is unexplained and what cannot be explained, and being happy with that. On your other point about sort of how does it come up in a conversation in the clinic, and I think that's, again, you sort of have to tailor the conversation depending on the situation the couple is in, and also be a bit guided by their response. And this is why it really helps to kind of get to know your clinician over time. And that's something that I like to do, is get to know my patients, whether it be clinic patients or patients that I see kind of outside, is getting to know people so that you can sort of help guide them on that journey and offer that support. And often I sometimes describe it as like a menu. You go, well, hang on a minute, like you're at the restaurant, and like, let's talk about all the different things that are on the menu, and some things you might not like or be completely allergic to, or that might not, like donor sperm or donor eggs might be something you don't even want to contemplate, but let's just see what's available. And perhaps you talk through and sort of point them all out. And that's a bit like a waiter, really. They ask, oh, well, what's this? And ask a few more questions. And that's how you get the conversation going. And it might not even be at that initial first time you bring it up. It could be later on. That's how I do it. I've got another colleague who says, well, your options are either donor sperm, fostering adoption, or sports cars and nice holidays. And that's how he does it. And I don't know which is the right approach, really. Sometimes people like the blunt approach, and other times a different way. So there's other ways of considering it.
I got to say, that's the conversation me and my wife had, in terms of, like, is it just going to be holidays to the Bahamas and kind of living our life?
Yeah.
Several people that I've talked to who haven't had success, that's how they've decided to do it, because that's how they were comfortable with doing it. I think that the acceptance is a hard thing to do, and people need to realise that getting to acceptance is almost like a process of grieving. You know, you do go through the guilt, you do go through the anger, you do go through those stages, and for everybody, it's a different length of time. Some people never get to acceptance, but from personal experience, it took a bit of time to kind of accept that if this doesn't happen, this might be the case of what might happen. But yeah, it's trying to work on that acceptance and understanding the process to get there is quite tricky.
And I think that support network piece comes into it again there, because I mean, I don't want to kind of put words in your mouth, Ciaran, but I imagine that, you know, I'm sure through the work that you do now and sharing your stories, you've probably come across guys that have had kids who donor sperm or have, you know, done this, that, and the other. And I think that when we're all isolated in our little like shells of, oh my God, like what is going on, and no one's sharing their stories, you don't get to see that actually there are so many like incredible ways to build a family and be a dad. And I think the more and more that men like yourself, and you know, we could list off all the great guys that, you know, are out there now doing it, I think people are being shown that there's so many different ways to be a father, and I think that's wonderful. And I think it will help people when they're navigating those steps to kind of, like you said, looking at the menu map, be able to go, and I can see this person and this person, it's really worked out well for them, and that might change their feelings on it over time. You know, it's still, like you said, still a real big grieving process sometimes and getting your head around it. But
I mean,
their stories.
We are programmed genetically to want to pass on our seed, you know, and it's a big thing, right? To kind of accept that that's not going to happen. But you're right. There's some great guys out there talking and being really open with their stories. And if you'd ask them, you know, would you change anything? They'd go, no, that's my child, and I love them. And it's that kind of realization and acceptance of actually it takes more than your DNA to be a father, to be a good one. And that's part of that process I was just saying about. It's that realization and acceptance that actually you can still be a dad, and you can still make a change to someone's life and develop a mini you or mini me or whatever you want to call it. It can happen. There's some good work going on out there at the moment.
Yeah. I mean, it's incredible. Right, we're nearly at the end, but I've got one last question, kind of aimed at you, Ciaran, but I'm sure you guys have maybe got some insights as well. So it's sort of around nutrition. So they say, my wife and I have been struggling for 7 years without success and have made many changes one at a time during these 7 years to improve my fertility. My question is in regards to nutrition. I've engaged the services of a personal trainer, and my BMI is far more favourable now than it has been for quite some time. I would like to add protein shakes so my exercise with weights could be more fruitful. However, the internet gives me mixed answers on how positive or negative adding such things to my diet will be for my fertility. I do not drink alcohol or caffeine. I'm also a non-smoker. My diet is predominantly vegetarian, but I do have salmon, chicken, and turkey on a regular basis, as well as taking ExSeed supplements. So yeah, protein shakes, it's funny, this is the third time I've had this conversation this week. So what are your takes on protein shakes, guys?
My take on protein shakes are, you've got to understand why you're taking them, if there's a purpose. I mean, if you're a training athlete, they can be really productive. My main thing is understanding what's in them, because there's a lot of different things on the market. A lot of sweeteners, a lot of chemical compounds in them, all kinds of things, which, you know, without going into too much detail, can be just as kind of damaging to you as you know, taking other different kinds of supplements. So for me, if I kind of prefer to stick to more food-based proteins. I mean, if you want to increase your protein in your diet, find a source. I mean, you know, eat a little bit extra chicken, or eat some more mushrooms in your diet and things like that, where you can kind of, you know what's in it. If you're getting an organic piece of chicken, you know it's organic and it's good for you. If you are going to look at protein, I favour plant-based proteins, and there's some really good ones on the market. You've just got to make sure you read that in ingredients label and that there's no significant additives or sweeteners in it. That's my advice. So if you can put it in naturally, just eat a little bit more. If you really want to take protein supplements, I would stick to plant-based, and I would also just make sure there's no nasty additives in them.
Thanks. Emil,
Yeah.
Matt, have you got any thoughts on that?
I can also quickly comment on the mixed signals that the internet might be sending. I think this whey protein sort of approach came up, I think, a few years ago, I think in 2019, because there came a small pilot study on men who were going to a fertility clinic, and these men were taking protein supplements they were taking whey, and then the clinic asked them to stop, and then they measured the semen quality afterwards, and they found that the semen quality increased. But basically this was a really small study. So I think if I remember right, it was around 20 people, and the change that they saw was not that significant. So I think also the same group actually a few years after did an experiment in animals where they wanted to see like the upper level of whey protein in animals and see if that affected fertility, and they could not see any effect on fertility or any of the sex hormones. So I think this is probably why it's sending mixed signals. So I think my approach would probably be that it's likely not to be sort of having a huge impact on the sperm quality. So I think if you want to take whey because it adds something to your training, I think that should be fine. I think one of the things to take into consideration is that some of these products does contain contaminants, and there's been quite a few studies on contaminants in whey protein, such as anabolic steroids, for example. So I think be mindful with what brand you're choosing, and try and see if you can find a good study on some of the brands that are having a high purity and where you trust that it's made with a good manufacturing process.
Great, thanks, Neil. Matt, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think it's one of the few things that I'm sort of quite absolute on, which is I advise all men that are being seen in a fertility clinic, whether they've got normal sperm counts or not to use protein supplements. And the reason why, and it's a difficult one, because you're right, I've heard these stories about contaminants with anabolic steroids, and I found that maybe was easy to believe many years ago when the only place you got protein supplements was in dodgy gyms. But nowadays, when you can buy them in the supermarket, you'd like to think that these contaminants don't exist. But I think one of the things with like all protein supplements is they're not regulated like medicines. What they actually say they have on the bottle or the supplement might not be exactly what is in it, because they're regulated more like food products. And even if there isn't the research to show they're harmful is not all that strong, if there's something there's certainly nothing that I'm aware of that shows that they create any benefit in terms of your fertility. So I think it depends on why you're taking it. Like if you're an elite athlete and it's really important for your kind of your job, then maybe it's worth consulting with kind of your sports coach. But most men are not kind of elite athletes and can get enough protein by eating a high protein diet, which I think is probably like the right approach for most men. So maybe I take like a bit of a more of a hard line on it than the other two, but I think that there's very little, there's nothing to show that it can do any benefit, but might cause harm. So avoid it if you can.
I love that. Mixed messages on the internet and here, but that's how it goes.
I definitely think if you get it in your diet,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
that's the best way to go.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that's the same for any nutrient, really. You know, I mean, this guy here, obviously, ExSeed, we've got some great supplements that have been, put together with fertility really, really in mind. But I know Emil would back me up here. It's like we want those to help you, but it's not like go and eat McDonald's every night and take a supplement. That's not gonna help. It's to supplements are to supplement a healthy lifestyle, not to replace it. And I guess the same can kind of be said for protein, that actually if you can get it in natural sources, it's always going to be better for you. And then, like you said, I was about to say way up the options, and then that was like a good whey protein pun. So maybe that's a good place to end.
Yeah, I think Connie also I think this person is also mentioning that he's looking out for his BMI. So I think also when you are looking out for your BMI, I think it's a good approach not to have too many liquid calories. I think as well. I think it's not really the best approach.
Yeah, awesome. So I mean, we're at 8:30. I feel like we packed a lot into that hour and a half. I'm really grateful for your guys' time, and also thank you so much for coming along.